Hello everyone, this is Rift, your friendly neighborhood weeb speaking, and welcome back to Terraria. In today's episode, I'm going to be taking on the Wall of Flesh and finally finishing pre-hard mode. To begin with, I started by exploring the dungeon, where I managed to find a cobalt shield. This was extremely useful. I went back home and I crafted an obsidian skull, and I combined it with the cobalt shield to make an obsidian shield. This would grant immunity to knockback and fire blocks. I ventured down to Hell, where I opened a bunch of shadow chests using a shadow key I found in the dungeon, but I didn't find much of value, so I headed home. Back at home, I dumped some stuff into my chests, and then I noticed that the clothier had moved in. Except he was in the sky. So I built a long rope into the sky, and then I realized that I'd gone to the wrong floating island, so I built another rope into the sky, and then I bought the familiar set from the clothier. This vanity set allowed my character to return to their default clothing, and with my black and purple color scheme, I thought I looked pretty fantastic. Back over to the dungeon, where I spent approximately a decade mining blue bricks and continued searching for loot. I didn't find much of value and went home. I took a joyride on Cthulhu Airlines, and then I sold his remains to the Goblin Tinkerer. Next, I wandered into the jungle to partake in everyone's favorite thing to do in Terraria: fishing. After losing a little bit more of my sanity, I went to the snow biome and began preparing an arena for the next boss, the Deerclops. But he ended up spawning naturally instead, and well, you can guess how that went. I used a bewitching table from the dungeon, which increased my max number of summons by 1, meaning that I could now have 1, 2, 3, 4 minions to defend me at all times. Luckily for me, the Deerclops is the only boss in Terraria which doesn't despawn or heal after killing you, so I headed back to the snow biome again, except this time, I was ready to fight. After killing the Deerclops, I replaced the skeletron relic I had on top of my base with the Deerclops relic. Originally, I was going to end the episode here, but since the fight happened so suddenly and didn't go according to plan, I decided to keep going and finish pre-hard mode once and for all. But first, if I was going to fight the Wall of Flesh, I needed to prepare a little before entering hard mode. The first thing I wanted to do was expand my pylon network, which would make it easier for me to travel around the world, especially with stronger enemies everywhere. So I headed down to the mushroom biome and began construction of a crappy little wooden house. Then I moved in the mechanic and the Goblin Tinkerer. I then noticed that the Goblin Tinkerer had launched himself into the elevator. I dug into the side of another mushroom biome and built this slightly weird-shaped dome house, and built another house into the floor. I returned to the mechanic and Tinkerer, and I built a mushroom pylon. And I placed it on a small stone pedestal. Next, I moved in the demolitionist and the hairstylist to replace them. Then they both flung themselves into the elevator as well. I made a long journey over to the ocean, and I began building a boat. After messing with its shape, I very slowly drained out the water inside it, and then I started destroying the ugly lopsided arena that I had above my base. I was going to build a much bigger and better one for hard mode. At this point, the Tinkerer and Mechanic had moved into the cave house, so I bought a cavern pylon, and I placed it down. I built some stairs, and then I bought an ungodly amount of dynamite. I was going to use this to blow 2 massive holes straight down into hell itself. This would hopefully shield me from the spread of the evil biomes in hard mode. Back on the surface, I began clearing out room for my new arena, and using the stone I'd gathered from blowing holes in the planet, I started building. And then I built some more. I fought off a blood moon, I built some more, and I built more, and more, and more, until I had this 4-layer monstrosity. I placed in some sunflowers, filled a couple of honey pools, and finally my brand new arena was done. This was perfect for fighting the mech bosses. I crafted as many suspicious eyes as I could to test the arena later, and then visited Hell to start working on the Hell Bridge, where I would eventually fight the Wall of Flesh. I realized that clearing the way would take too long, so I bought a lot of bombs. I then bathed in lava, and remembered that I was supposed to buy an ocean pylon, so I did, and I placed it down on the beach. I went down to Hell to blow some stuff up, kept building the Hell Bridge, and died, and used my bombs to blow up everything in my path as I continued building. As a summoner, the Wall of Flesh was going to be significantly harder to kill than it normally was, and so I wanted to prepare for it as much as I possibly could, and that involved making the bridge absolutely massive. I continued to flatten everything in Hell, and died, and then I decided to take my anger out on the Eye of Cthulhu. So I flew him into space again, and killed him, tested out my arena, killed him again, killed him again, killed him again, and again. 10 times in total to be precise. After flaunting my superiority over the second weakest boss in the game, I sold everything to the Tinkerer, and I managed to net a grand total of 2 platinum coins. I was now rich. I went back to the boat and moved in the Angler and the Painter, who I both hate, and blew up more stuff in the under. Placed a bunch of campfires after building a little more. Continued building the Hell Bridge even more. And after a very, very long and very painful process of building in a straight line and dying repeatedly, I got pissed off and exited the game. But I did come back the next day, and when I did, I'd learned some stuff. For example, I found out that the Snapthorn, the whip I'd been using this whole time, wasn't the best pre-hard mode whip at all. Instead it was this, the Spinal Tap. I spent my hard-earned money reforging it, and then I said goodbye to my Snapthorn, and visited the Witch Doctor to buy another item I wanted, the Pygmy Necklace. This would increase my max number of minions by 1, again. This meant that including the buff from the Bewitching table, I could have a grand total of 5 minions with me at all times. I then attempted the Old One's army, because I wanted another item, which would increase the damage that my minions did. The first few waves were pretty easy, and I didn't really have to do anything because my minions killed everything for me. But that didn't last long, and everything very quickly descended into complete chaos, and I died after being trampled by 1,000 enemies. In the end, I didn't get the item I wanted, but I was also way too lazy to attempt the Old One's army again, so I didn't bother. Instead, I spent more money reforging stuff, and I got my defense all the way up to 41. That was pretty good. I went back to the jungle in search of loot, and I accidentally managed to summon the Queen Bee. I also found an Anklet of the Wind. This was exactly what I wanted, because it was one of the items I needed to craft the lightning boots. Unfortunately, the other item I needed was an aglet, and I searched everywhere for it, and couldn't find it anywhere. It didn't seem like there was a single one in the entire world. So I took my frustrations out on the Eye of Cthulhu yet again, and continued building the Hell Bridge. I kept building for a very long time, and finally I had made it to the edge of the world. Now that I was happy with my Hell Bridge, I went to gather bait in the jungle. Then I headed home, and organized my chest a little bit. And against my better judgment, I went fishing. I tried expanding the size of the water pool this time in hopes that it would help me get something useful. And it seemed like the game finally felt bad for me and blessed me with a variegated large fish. 2 in fact. I used the fish to brew 2 summoning potions, and then headed to the corruption where I dug a small area out, added some water, and started fishing again. I caught a bass, but I also caught the fish I wanted, an ebon koi. This would allow me to make a wrath potion, which would increase my damage by 10%. So after brewing all the potions I could possibly need, I decided it was time to end pre-hard mode. And I headed down to Hell and ran all the way across the Hell Bridge, placed even more campfires for their regeneration effect on my way there, and finally, I summoned the wall. And then I died when it had this tiny sliver of health left. I mean, look at how little health it had left. Look at that. Anyway, so I got pissed off again and took another break. But after stealing my resolve, I came back and went through the very painful process of gathering all the potions again. And this time I expanded the Hell Bridge even further. I was determined to kill the wall, and I would not fail again. So I ran all the way back down the Hell Bridge and muted the music to make this moment as dramatic as I could make it, and eventually made it back to the edge of the world. This time I also mixed my imps with my vampire frogs, which would hopefully allow me to deal more damage. Then I took a very deep breath and stared at my menu for a little while, and threw the voodoo doll into the lava.